A dusty wind swept across the edge of the New Mexico plains in 1892. The sun hung low behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over abandoned homesteads and the faint silhouettes of grazing cattle. In the distance, a lone figure appeared on the horizon, Allison Kainer, carrying little more than a bag of letters and hope. Her past weighed heavily on her, but she walked steadily, each step a testament to quiet determination. The journey ahead promised hardship and uncertainty, yet also the possibility of a new life, where strength of heart mattered more than the pace of her steps. Follow along and subscribe to Dust and Devotion Tales for more stories of courage, heart, and hope. Allison Kainer stepped down from the stagecoach onto the sun-baked outskirts of Albuquerque in 1892. Dust swirled around her boots as she adjusted the strap of her worn satchel, the weight of her few possessions pressing lightly against her shoulder. The town unfolded slowly before her eyes, wooden sidewalks creaking under the hesitant steps of passers-by who glanced at her with thinly veiled suspicion. Each movement reminded her of the life she had left behind, of doors closed and promises broken. Yet there was a faint pulse of hope she carried with her, fragile but persistent. The wind swept down from the distant Sandia Mountains, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dry earth, a whisper of freedom and distant possibilities that stretched beyond the horizon. She walked along the main street, observing the scattered shops, their weathered signs swinging gently, and the occasional horse-drawn wagon rattling past. Her steps were measured, careful, a rhythm she had cultivated over years of walking the line between endurance and necessity. The sunlight glinted off metal hinges and dusty windows, reflecting both the harshness of her reality and the glimmer of potential she had chased across the desert. Every shadow along the boardwalk seemed to judge her pace, her posture, the slight unevenness of her gait, but she kept her head high, drawing strength from the knowledge that she carried her own worth with her. The smells of fresh bread and burning coal mingled in the air, grounding her in the sensory life of the town, and she imagined a space where her efforts and determination might finally be recognized. She passed a small bakery with flour dusting the windowsills, a blacksmith hammering rhythmically in a nearby shop, and children weaving between horses' legs, laughter ringing despite the relentless sun. The town was alive in its own stubborn way, indifferent to the struggles of one newcomer, yet offering tiny signs that opportunity could be found for those patient enough to look beyond the surface. With every step, Allison felt both the weight of solitude and the quiet thrill of possibility, a delicate balance that pressed her forward, urging her to seek a place where her abilities, her resilience, and her quiet strength could be seen and valued. She adjusted the satchel again and inhaled the arid air, letting it fill her lungs with the promise that somewhere along these streets, among the rough-hewn buildings and the wary townsfolk, a new chapter awaited, one that would not judge her by her past, but by the courage she carried into each uncertain day. Allison moved from shop to shop, following the advertisements she had answered with cautious hope, each step measured and deliberate. The promises of work and a welcoming place had filled her with quiet anticipation, yet each encounter carried a familiar weight of judgment. When employers saw the slight unevenness of her gait, their eyes hardened, and the brief warmth in their expressions vanished. Offers that had seemed certain dissolved in excuses about the limitations of her weak leg, leaving Ellison to bear the sting of disappointment without the relief of understanding. The harshness of rejection pressed against her chest like the relentless sun above, but she refused to let it break her resolve. In the evenings, she returned to the modest room rented by Widow Harper, the walls bare and simple, the bed narrow, and the supper plain. Yet it was a shelter in its quiet way, a temporary respite from the constant scrutiny of the outside world. Here, in the solitude of the fading light, she traced each encounter in her mind, replaying the expressions, the gestures, the judgments, and the fleeting glimmers of kindness that had accompanied the rejections. She cataloged the lessons hidden in the disappointments, understanding that resilience was not built from ease or approval, but from the silent determination to continue moving forward despite every closed door. She observed how others had focused on what she could not do, failing to notice the years she had spent cultivating skill, patience, and resourcefulness. The simple act of preparing her modest meal, of setting the room in order, and tending to her few belongings became a ritual of quiet strength, a reminder that her worth existed independently of the opinions she could not control. Night deepened beyond the dusty windows, and the distant whistle of the wind through the town streets seemed to echo her own steady rhythm of endurance, a cadence that carried her forward, step by careful step, toward a place where someone might finally see the substance beneath the surface, where her perseverance and the quiet power of her heart could be recognized and valued. Each day ended with the same ritual of reflection and resolve, the recognition that strength was measured not by speed or appearance, but by the ability to rise again after repeated disillusionment, to face another dawn with the same courage that had brought her to Albuquerque in the first place. One evening, as the town settled into its familiar quiet, Ellison received a letter that felt different from all the others she had carried across the desert. It arrived folded and unadorned, offered without ceremony, yet its weight rested heavily in her hands. The message spoke of honest work on a nearby ranch owned by James Colton, a man seeking help with the daily order of his household and land. There were no lofty promises and no careful reassurances, only a clear outline of responsibilities that centered on steadiness, attention, and willingness rather than speed or outward perfection. As Ellison read and reread the words, a cautious sense of relief settled over her, followed closely by a spark of interest she had not felt since her arrival. For the first time, the work before her did not seem shaped by what she lacked, but by what she could offer. She spent the night in quiet reflection, listening to the wind move through the narrow streets and across the rooftops, allowing herself to imagine a place where effort mattered more than appearance. At dawn, she prepared herself with care, gathering her belongings and stepping outside as the sky softened from deep blue to pale gold. The road leading away from town stretched open and wide, and as she followed it, the rising sun cast long shadows across the land. Hills rolled gently in the distance, their edges catching the early light, and the air carried a freshness that felt like a promise of renewal. Each step forward was steady, grounded in a growing sense of purpose that replaced the lingering weight of doubt. As Ellison traveled toward the ranch, the landscape seemed to breathe with quiet resilience, mirroring the resolve she carried within herself. She watched birds lift from the grass at her approach, and cattle move slowly across open fields, unhurried and sure in their place. The rhythm of the land calmed her thoughts, easing the tension she had learned to hold in her shoulders. With every mile, her anticipation grew, not as a fragile hope easily broken, but as a measured confidence shaped by all she had endured.
This opportunity felt earned, not given, and it stirred a determination to meet it with honesty and strength. By the time the ranch came into view, framed by open sky and weathered fences, Allison felt her heartbeat quicken with quiet resolve. She did not know what awaited her beyond the gate, but she sensed that this place might offer something the town had not: the chance to be seen for her capabilities rather than her limitations. The morning light stretched across the fields, and she stepped forward into it, carrying with her the steady belief that this path, unlike the others before it, might finally lead to something lasting.
The ranch spread wide beneath the open sky, framed by rolling golden hills that caught the morning light and held it like something precious. Cattle moved slowly across the grass, unhurried and calm, their presence grounding the land in a steady rhythm of work and patience. Allison approached along the dirt path with measured steps, her body aware of every uneven stone, her mind focused on keeping her pace steady. The air smelled of dry earth and sun-warmed grass, and for the first time in a long while, the space around her felt open rather than judging. James Colton stood near the main house, solid and still against the wide landscape. His posture carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew the land well and trusted it to answer effort with reward. When he looked at her, his attention rested without scrutiny. He did not measure her by the slight drag in her step or the careful way she shifted her weight. His gaze held calm recognition, as though he saw the whole of her rather than the parts others had learned to single out. That simple absence of tension eased something tight in her chest. The house behind him was sturdy and plain, built for endurance rather than display. Its walls bore the marks of weather and time, not neglect but honest use. Inside, everything was clean and orderly, yet stripped of softness. There were no extra touches meant to impress, no signs of comfort chosen for pleasure alone. The space reflected a life devoted to responsibility, to keeping things running, to making sure the work never fell behind. Allison sensed a quiet loneliness there, not loud or demanding, but settled into the corners like dust that had never quite been brushed away. She moved through the rooms with careful attention, noting what needed tending without being told. Her hands found their purpose quickly, falling into familiar motions that required focus rather than speed. Each task grounded her further, giving shape to the nervous energy that had traveled with her since dawn. The work did not ask her to be anything other than present and willing. It rewarded care instead of perfection. Outside, the day unfolded in steady hours. She learned the patterns of the animals, the way the ranch breathed with the sun's rise and fall. There was comfort in that predictability, in knowing what was expected and being trusted to meet it. Her body ached, but it was a clean ache, earned through effort rather than resistance. She adjusted her movements where she needed to, finding balance through experience instead of apology. James observed from a distance, never hovering, never interrupting. His attention came in brief, thoughtful glances that carried neither doubt nor surprise. He seemed to notice the way she anticipated needs before they became problems, how she moved with quiet determination, how the space around her gradually shifted as order replaced small pockets of neglect. The ranch responded to her presence in subtle ways, as if recognizing a careful hand. As the afternoon light softened, Allison felt a growing sense of belonging take root. It was fragile, still untested, but real. For once, she was not waiting for the moment when someone would decide she was too slow or too much trouble. Here, her efforts spoke clearly, and that was enough. The land did not rush her,
and neither did the man who owned it. By the time the shadows stretched long across the fields, fatigue settled into her bones, alongside something warmer. She had not been asked to prove herself with words or promises. She had simply been allowed to work. In that quiet permission, she felt the shape of a future begin to form, uncertain but possible, built not on pity or lowered expectations, but on steady hands and a will that refused to bend.
Days passed slowly, each one folding into the next with the steady rhythm of work and shared purpose. Allison and James moved through the ranch together, side by side, each task revealing something new about the land, the animals, and each other. She watched him carefully, noticing the precision in his movements, the way he read the subtle shifts in the earth beneath the hooves of the cattle, and the way he anticipated the smallest signs of the weather. In turn, he observed her determination, the way she adapted to the labor, never letting her slower steps define her contribution. Through these quiet hours, Allison began to understand that true strength was measured not by speed or perfection, but by patience, persistence, and a keen attention to the details that others overlooked. She learned to follow the rhythms of the ranch, to anticipate what needed tending before it became urgent, and in doing so, she felt her confidence grow. James spoke little about the hardships he had endured, but in sharing fragments of his past, losses, joys, and moments of quiet reflection, he showed Allison that life's challenges did not have to diminish a person, but could instead forge resilience and wisdom. Each story he shared added layers to her understanding of him, and gradually she found herself revealing pieces of her own history, the struggles and rejection she had endured, not as burdens, but as evidence of her capacity to endure. In the evenings, they would sit on the veranda, the sky above painted in shades of fire as the sun sank behind the distant mesas, the wind carrying the scent of dry earth and grass. They worked in silence, each comfortable with the other's presence, yet the closeness grew with every shared glance, every unspoken acknowledgement of effort and understanding. Allison felt her heart opening in ways it never had before, trust blooming quietly, unhurried, like the slow unfolding of a desert flower.
There was no rush, no expectation, only the steady reassurance that she could be herself and still be valued, appreciated, and seen. She began to recognize that the past she had carried, the pain, the setbacks, the moments of doubt, was not a chain, but a foundation, one that had built the resilience that now allowed her to engage fully with the life she was creating. In James's steady presence, she discovered that vulnerability was not weakness, but a bridge to connection, that opening one's heart carefully and with awareness could lead to a trust that ran deeper than words. Night fell over the ranch, stars appearing one by one, and in that quiet, Allison felt the profound sense of belonging she had never known, a recognition that she was no longer alone in her journey. The ranch, the land, the work, and the companionship all intertwined into a single rhythm, a life that demanded care and gave back respect, warmth, and the tender certainty that her strength mattered. She realized that to trust and to be trusted was a power she had almost forgotten, and in the presence of someone who saw her true self, she allowed herself to embrace it fully. The days continued in this quiet harmony, each one building a deeper understanding, and as the seasons shifted subtly, Allison felt the roots of connection and love
grow steadily, establishing a foundation for the life she had always hoped to find.
Autumn had settled over the ranch, painting the rolling hills in shades of gold and amber, and the air carried the crisp promise of change. Allison moved through the house with a quiet contentment, arranging fabrics over the windows and placing small vases of flowers near the door, each choice bringing warmth and life to the space. The scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the earthy aroma of the land, filling the home with a sense of care and presence that spoke of more than just survival. Outside, the cattle grazed lazily on the sun-drenched pastures, while the wind stirred the tall grasses in gentle waves, and the horizon stretched endlessly, a reminder of both freedom and the work that grounded them. Allison and James climbed the small hill near the house to watch the sunset, standing side by side as the sky blazed with hues of orange and deep purple, reflecting on how far they had come. Every rejection Allison had faced, every moment of solitude and doubt, now seemed like stepping stones that had led her to this place, to a life where her abilities were valued and her spirit acknowledged. The rhythm of daily chores, tending the animals and caring for the land, had become a shared language between them, a bond built on patience, respect, and the unspoken understanding of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. James moved with deliberate care, and Allison matched his pace, each action reinforcing the harmony that had grown between them over weeks of steady effort. The evenings unfolded with quiet rituals of companionship, listening to the wind, the distant calls of wildlife, and the gentle rustle of leaves. And in these moments, a deep connection blossomed, rooted in honesty and shared experience rather than expectation or pretense. Allison felt a profound sense of belonging, knowing that her past hardships had not defined her limitations, but had shaped her resilience and capacity to love and be loved in return. The ranch, once a place of unfamiliar work and tentative hope, had become a sanctuary where she could be fully herself, and each sunrise brought renewed purpose and quiet joy. As the stars began to punctuate the night sky, glimmering above the vast landscape, Allison realized that she had found more than a home. She had discovered a life built on mutual understanding, acceptance, and the freedom to grow alongside someone who saw her true worth. Every challenge she had faced, every step that once felt uncertain, had led her to this new path, where love and strength intertwined seamlessly, creating a foundation for a future she had once only dreamed of. Standing together, the warmth of their shared triumphs and the anticipation of days yet to come settled around them like a comforting cloak, and Allison knew that this was the place where she could finally breathe, create, and simply be. Subscribing to Dust and Devotion Tales would mean stepping into more stories of courage, love, and hope. Each one a reminder that even the hardest journeys can lead to profound fulfillment and the discovery of one's true self.